So good morning, everyone. I am glad to welcome you today to this webinar organized by EuroACE, the European Alliance of Companies for Energy Efficiency in Buildings. I am Hélène Sibilo. I work at EuroACE as a Senior EU Affairs Manager. Today, I will guide you through this webinar as your moderator. Next slide, please. Before we start, just a short message on the housekeeping rules. As a participant, you are kindly asked to remain muted for the whole duration of the webinar, and we also ask you to not turn on your camera for bandwidth. Only the speakers and myself will stay unmuted when they speak. After the speakers' presentations, we are organizing a Q&A session. During this Q&A session and also already during the speakers' presentations, you can type in your questions in the GoToMeeting chat box. Please address your question to everyone in this chat box. I will pick the questions and read them out loud to our speakers. And if time does not allow to cover all the questions, they will be forwarded to the speakers for a later response in writing. The PowerPoint presentations, the recording of the webinar, and the questions will be shared with you in due course, and they will also be posted on our website. Without further ado, I pass the floor to Céline Carré, our Vice President, for the formal introduction to this webinar and to the topic of renovating schools. Céline, the floor is yours for about 10 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much, Hélène. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes, okay, fantastic. Welcome to everyone, and you can move to the next slide. So these are just a few words about EuroACE, which everyone know, and I, by this occasion, welcome our member Carrie, who just came back in the EuroACE family. We represent over 200,000 employees, and we have 1,000 production facilities in the EU. Next slide, please. You will know that we are strong believer in the power of energy efficiency, especially right now in the recovery program. Not only can it help accelerate decarbonization of our society, but it can and it will create local employment, support economic growth, and also provide Europeans with comfortable and healthy places to live. You can go to the next slide. Many of you will know the Renovate Europe campaign that was launched in 2011 by EuroACE members and now gathers over 35 partners, including at national level. Renovate Europe is the voice to push for higher ambition at the political level in Europe and in member states for renovation. You will see our campaign and campaigns. Recently, Renovate Europe has launched a call for a dedicated renovation facility to support the financing of building renovation in the EU recovery package. You can now move on. Yes, so I think before we go to our speakers, I wanted to take a small step back and think about why it's important to focus at school. I think it's good to remember that it is at school that we forge the understanding of society, of the world. It is at school that we develop our dreams, our minds, the critical thinking that we need to grow as strong adults. And for some, it is also needed to remember that some kids are going to school as the only safe and warm place to be, to hear words of recognition or to get a proper meal. Schools are very important for our kids. And education is key to a better, to a cleaner, and to a more peaceful world. This was valid when Nelson Mandela said it, and it's still very valid today. But for all of this to happen, we need to look at school as not only conducive to learning, but also as conducive to growing strong adults that have the social and emotional skills that need to be in the world. You can go to the next slide. A few figures to keep in mind. We have almost 800,000 educational buildings in the EU, and recently, you know that many kids were at home with their parents. You just need to imagine that these were about 15 million people in pre-primary education, 30 million of them in primary education. Luckily, they all go back probably to school after the summertime. The average GDP spending on education is almost 5% in Europe. And I've taken a look at some figures in France as well, where we have 80% of the schools that were built over 20 years ago, where in fact schools in terms of surface represent half the surface of the local authority building stock that is in total 280 million square meters. Primary school as such would consume 30% of the energy consumption of local authorities. And we've looked at an example in Auvergne where heating represents 3/4 of the final energy consumption, and each student would represent 400 kilograms of CO2 per year. I think it's useful to have those figures in mind also for engaging with school students. Next slide, please. I have, as I've mentioned, Renovate Europe, and it is a very important dimension of the campaign to demonstrate the visibility of those renovation and the benefit they bring to citizens and to children. And at our last Renovate Europe Day, for those who could visit the exhibition, which is, by the way, still online, you could see two examples in the educational segment. One was this kindergarten in Velika Gorica in Croatia. This is a city that is a signatory of the Covenant of Mayors and started 2011 with the Sustainable Energy and Action Plan. The school has been renovated in 2019, and as you see, it's quite a big facility with almost 600 small children and over 100 employees. And it was a very important project for the school management that also wanted to turn the school into an eco school, and then thought that to complete the picture, and it would fit very well in the DNA of the school to have it as a highly performing school. The principle of the school, the quote you can see underline the healthier and safer environment that the renovation has brought, because it's very important for them to have a place where children feel happy, safe, and protected. Can we go to the next slide? This is another example shown also in this Renovate Day 2019 exhibition. This is a project in Italy. It was carried by my own company, Saint-Gobain. And the history is interesting because the school had been closed in 2014 due to other reasons than energy efficiency. It did not comply with anti-seismic requirements. And it was decided to undertake a deep energy retrofit and transformation, and by doing so, to try to get the best balance between energy efficiency, sustainability, safety, and comfort. And at the core of the project was the multi-comfort program of Saint-Gobain, where we managed to have an upgrade from class A to class G of the energy performance. There was also a focus on the indoor air quality, and this is very important for all kids to have a sufficient amount of clean and fresh air. The acoustic conditions were improved as well as the natural light. You can go to the next slide. These are just a few pictures that show you the improvement. My final slide, and to introduce the topic, is raising a few questions. How can we now accelerate school renovation with the renovation wave? We know that the figures are not particularly good when it comes to the achievement on the 3% rate that sits in the Energy Efficiency Directive for central government public building. Obviously, schools sit a bit outside of it, although the recitals in this directive encourage to look a bit wider than just central government buildings. But the case is that they would certainly benefit from a stronger push and from a stronger availability on funding. Another point is regarding the level of ambition, because we know from the most projects that exist that they would typically deliver 10 to 30% of savings. Some of them reach 40, 45, 50, and then you have a minority of this project that are really deep renovation. We also know that the investment needed to deeply renovate half of the educational building would amount to 300 billion euro. That was flagged in a recent study by the Jacques Delors Institute. I'd like to flag a few questions. What's next for schools in the renovation wave? How can we better prioritize those buildings? Could a dedicated EU funding stream really ease access and speed of renovation? What about market maturity? What about the use of energy performance contracting, especially the articulation of funding, public funding with EPCs? How can we generate and leverage the internal capacity of public authorities? And last but not least, I think it's very important to envisage the push to school renovation as a holistic one: energy, climate, health, and educational. The next slide, please. Yes, so in today's discussion, we will discuss the benefits of renovating school with Marie-Angela Fabry from BPIE. We will also take the example of what's happening in Belgium to have a real plan for renovating schools. We will discuss the barriers and how to move on the incentive side to trigger the full potential of this building segment. I'll give quickly the floor back to Hélène and then to our speakers.
Thank you, Céline, for this scene-setting introduction and some examples of real projects. I would like now to welcome our first speaker, Mr. Carles Goldstein. I believe he is joining by phone. Carles Goldstein is a member of the cabinet of Ms. Kadri Simpson, the Commissioner for Energy. And Carles is responsible for the energy efficiency files in the cabinet. He will give some introductory words on behalf of the European Commission on the renovation wave and the possible focus on schools. Carles, the floor is yours and you have about 10 minutes.
Hello and good morning. Can everybody hear me, please? Hélène, can you confirm?
Yes, the sound is good.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I apologize not being there visually because it's a bit difficult to connect through Commission firewalls at the moment, so I decided to call in this morning. Well, first of all, thank you very much to EuroACE for organizing this very timely discussion on the renovation on schools, especially now that I think across Europe everybody has entered into school holidays. So what could be the best thing to look forward to in the autumn, right? Well, many schools were shut down because of the crisis, and we'll see what situation we will be in autumn. At least here in my school where my kids are studying, they promised that they will closely monitor the situation, but they expect resuming back to normal. So if we're speaking about urgent action, then renovating schools over the course of summer, I hope, is already in the pipelines, because from the EU level, it will not be in time for the renovation wave, but perhaps next year. So maybe a couple of words on the context and where we stand. I think that we are very much marked by the crisis, the pandemic that has ensued. We see that people have changed their business as usual. they're more, let's say, indoors, consuming less certain things. We have seen different sales numbers, for example, for vehicles, but happily, electric cars demand has remained strong even when the internal combustion engine demand has plummeted over the past months. So we also see that because of the way the energy system is structured, there is more renewables in the grid. So, for example, we can see that in Spain, in particular, almost half of the energy, entire energy consumption, not just electricity, came from renewable sources. And for electricity specifically, that was 3/4 in the month of April. So we see that the crisis and the change in demand patterns has had a profound effect on the way that member states and their energy systems function. Now, when we maybe look towards the environment where we spend a lot of our time, which is the offices, and for children, it's of course schools, we see that building renovation is not just a possibility, but a must. And I'll explain why. I mean, we have seen a lot of extreme weather events, for example, recently. I think a week ago, one of the Arctic towns, the most northern town in Siberia, Verkhoyansk, you maybe picked it up, who holds also the world record for the lowest recorded temperature in an inhabited town, 67.8 degrees centigrade below zero, experienced temperatures around 38, 36 degrees just a week and a half ago. And I checked that today's weather forecast is 28 centigrade per day and 17 per night, which wouldn't be exceptional if it was one-off, but the issue is that it's quite permanent, that the temperatures are relatively high. So what we're looking at is that schools need updated heating and cooling systems, basically. And if we see that the probability of weather changes increases as time goes by, and the climate seems to be on the warming trend right now, as we observe, and that we need to ensure that the high quality indoor air is provided at the buildings where many of us spend multiple hours per day, then this leads us to the question how and in which way we should upgrade their heating systems, and also when it's time to renovate the building envelope, how do we do it? And for the Commission, it's actually an integrated matter. So you should look at the infrastructure that provides you the energy to the site. You should look at the envelope. You should look at the technical systems that are in there, how they're managed, and then, of course, at the data that's available from that management. So it's a whole big ecosystem. Maybe I can now take you to the logic of the renovation wave. So it's a proposal, an initiative that the Commission had already in the European Green Deal. It was announced several months ago, but its importance has increased through the period of the pandemic. And the reason is that when we look at the policymaking here in Brussels, or we speak with national administrations or local administrations, then what we hear is that they see a need to make the economy recover faster. And one way of doing it is to inject money, as usually is a crisis response. But the question is how and in what direction? If one were to build a big specific infrastructure project, that would benefit the society, but the money would remain, or the benefits would remain quite focused in the participants. Now, if you would tackle something like renovation, you would have a lot of potential to spread out those benefits across a big amount of population. Plus, then the people could, besides earning money from working in jobs associated with renovation and construction, could enjoy the benefits of the renovated building for a long time, which is why we hope that it will take us closer to decarbonizing Europe. Now, the renovation wave seems to be unanimously, or close to unanimously, one of the best ideas to revive the economy quickly and effectively. The question here is how to do it and what is the level of competence at different levels of administration. And here we need to be careful because we basically have in the EU two fundamental ways of going forward. Either we provide the carrots, the different sets of measures, policies, financing, or we provide the sticks to go with them, which is then specific targets and obligations. And we have to make sure that, first of all, the opportunities that we provide are attractive, so picked up by the market, easy to understand, and very difficult to turn down. So basically, it has to be quite simple copy-paste, although we have to understand that the situations in member states and the climatic conditions vary a lot. So it's a juggling exercise. And on the other hand, on the competency side, we have to make sure that if we request something to be done on the ground at EU level, then there is a quite concrete link to that actually happening. So enforcement and member states' willingness and readiness on the market side is going to be a prerequisite. The background of the renovation wave is, of course, that we have seen a relatively low annual renovation rate. It's around 1%. And if we know that about 78% of the buildings that exist currently are inefficient, it would take us several decades, way beyond 2050, to renovate them all. And the other issue is the depth of renovation. So whether the actual renovation that's being carried out delivers us the energy system and decarbonization needs of 2050. And we're trying to move in that direction with the renovation wave. Of course, we want to be visible, first of all, for the private sector by showing example on the public sector, and that's where the schools come in, also hospitals, social housing, affordable housing, multi-apartment buildings. And we don't want to make the renovation wave by any means exclusive to those sectors, but we want to have a particular focus so that we could offer something extra, an extra push in that direction. You have probably taken part, or some of you have taken part in the roadmap consultation, and the open public consultation questionnaire for the renovation wave should still be available to those of you who want to contribute. So we are looking forward to your ideas. And one last note to round up, there was an idea competition among the youth in several countries organized by the Commission. What would they do with the entire budget of the structural funds if they could just choose one project and implement it? And one quite impressive project that popped up was to cover all the roofs of schools across the EU with solar panels, solar PV. Which we hope would go along with renovation. So this is where I stop, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Carlis, for these introductory words and also setting the context of the renovation wave from the perspective of the European Commission. Now it's time to turn to our second speaker, Ms. Mariangela Fabri. She's Head of Research at BPIE, the Buildings Performance Institute Europe, and she will present some findings from studies about benefits of renovating schools. Mariangela, the floor is yours for about 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Hélène. Thank you to EuroACE for the invitation. Good morning, everyone. I am going to present actually the results of a study that was published a couple of years ago and sponsored by Renovate Europe and some of its partners, among the others. So just to show and prove that we have been looking at the benefits beyond the energy benefits, I have to say, of renovating schools and certain types of public buildings or buildings of public interest, how I would like to call them today, to see that there is really a reason and a driving that should put the attention on renovating certain types of buildings, especially in the context of the post-COVID recovery and the context of the renovation wave. If you can go to the next slide, please. So this study was published in 2018, and we originally looked at 3 types of buildings: schools, offices, and hospitals. And we did that because we realized that a large part of the population spent most of its time in these type of buildings during the year. And we also realized that there wasn't really enough information and enough data for us to really assess and quantify how much of these benefits could be taken into account when calculating and making cost optimal assessment of whether to do a certain type of renovation rather than another, and what type of renovation, and whether to which depth it should go, and to which extent it should cover these type of buildings. So if you can go to the next slide, I will just briefly explain what my colleagues did. Full disclosure, I wasn't part of this study. 4 of my colleagues did that. So we went through a literal selection, and we looked at over 400 relevant studies, including 73 that actually have quantified the impact of better indoor environment. And we looked through these studies and selected a number of parameters that we could keep constant over our research, so that we should try to compare the different elements. And as you can see here, the original studies really date from last centuries, like the 1935 were the first ones that we discovered, but there has been a really increase in the last 20 years in terms of scientific research, really trying to connect the indoor environmental parameter and the effects and impact that can have on public health and well-being. So then we really selected these criteria and backed the approach with a number of interviews and reviews by leading experts and stakeholders. And if you go to the next slide, you will see the overall approach of the methodology, which is really identifying these parameters, quantifying health and educational performance and benefits, and then extrapolating these data to a European level, because most of this information is done locally or per building type, but there was not a proper evaluation and extrapolation at European level. And then we try to put a monetary value on these benefits. So we looked at the parameters that are temperature, air quality, lighting, so indoor lighting, and natural and so daylight and artificial lighting, and noise. And we really looked at how that would impact the well-being, the health, and the performance of the occupants of these 3 types of buildings, so offices, schools, and hospitals. So if you go to the next slide, I will just want to present you what were the results for school. I don't think it's necessary to go to each and every one, but the main point here is that it is really clear from the literature that poor indoor environmental quality affects students' health, attendance, concentration, and learning performance. And as Celine correctly pointed out earlier, schools are an environment where you don't only provide education to children, you also provide a safe place, you also provide a thriving environment, and this is where a lot of this learning will be taken and continued over a lifetime. So the ability of learning, performing, feeling well, and learning how to behave, starts in schools, and so it does have a long-term impact over the life of a person, because we will bring then that approach to our offices and to our homes. So understanding the impact of renovation on these elements on children is also really important in terms of quantifying these benefits in the long term. And on this slide, I would like to point you to the first bullet point and the last bullet point. So for every degree of reduction in overheating, increases students' learning performance of over 2%. And just better daylight is associated with a 9 to 18 increase in educational performance. So it really shows that changing some of the parameters that we are usually looking at when doing a renovation has a direct impact on the ability of children to learn and perform in terms when they are in school, which means that if they feel better and they perform better, they also feel better when they are at home. And we do know that in 10% of the European population lives in energy poverty, which also means that a lot of these children enjoy a comfortable environment only at school. But we also know that these schools are very often have been built in the 50s, in the 60s, or in the most recent years. I think, Celine, you mentioned earlier, it's 20, most of the schools are older than 20 years. So we know that schools, even though might be the most comfortable environment a lot of children find themselves in, it's not necessarily as comfortable as they could be. If we go to the next slide, really, we do understand that children are a part of a more vulnerable part of the population. Maximizing the dimension of indoor environmental quality, as I said, really does provide an increased opportunity for these children to be healthier and to be better. And by be better just means performing better, being able to really just focus on what school should be about, which is learning to socialize and learning about our history, science maybe. It would also be really good, a good thing. So we have seen that by renovating buildings and putting attention to increasing the indoor environmental quality of these renovations as well has incredible impacts and positive impacts on their health, their attention, the ability to concentrate, the memory ability, readability, motivation. And we actually quantified, we tried to quantify on how much that these advantages, how much these benefits that come from a deep energy renovation of a building would they mean. And if you go to the next slide, you will see schools has been difficult in a way because we couldn't really monetize it in a way. The way we monetize it is that for every % of performance improvement, we calculated that reduced required learning time by approximately 2 days, based on the average school day a year. So by improving, each 1% of performance improvement, basically concluded that we could save up 2 school weeks per year, and the annual performance increase could be between 2 and 8%. The question remains about what can we do with this 2%. It could be time invested in different activities, but there is no answer to that. We didn't find any answer to that in the literature. And I want to go to just the last slides. In the context of the renovation wave, Carlis mentioned that we need to use stick and carrots to make sure that the opportunity is too good for the member states to take it, and simple enough for them to apply it. And we believe at BPIE that the European Commission has a leading role to create this enabling framework of carrots and sticks, and through a couple of points. First of all, aligning the health and the energy policy agenda. And that can be done in different ways. Two ways that would be really useful would be integrating the indicators for healthy buildings in data collection systems. As I mentioned, it was very difficult to get the data from this perspective. And also valuing health, well-being, and performance benefits alongside energy savings when calculating minimum energy performance requirements. Ensuring an ambitious implementation of the EPBD, making sure that wider benefits are effectively accounted for in long-term renovation strategies. And if we go to the next slide, I think the most important point would be making sure the member states understand that they have the opportunity to use the Next Generation EU to fund renovations of buildings like schools that require maybe higher upfront cost and longer payback times, but bring high societal benefits that can really be redistributed equally across all levels of society. So we do save in healthcare costs. That money can be used for other purposes. And engaging in the renovation of the public building stock is for us essential, because it will actually allow to stimulate market transformation, promote best practices. Those results can also be used as an educational school, so you can teach children about energy savings once their schools have been renovated. And schools have an advantage. We can and we know how they are used, how many people are in there, when the most occupancy occurs, and when they are empty. And renovations can be probably more easily scheduled, but Quentin will likely tell us whether it's so simple or not in the next presentation. And this is all I wanted to highlight today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mariangela, for this presentation about the positive impacts of renovating schools and also how this could feature in long-term renovation strategies and recovery plans. So now that we know how important it is to undertake those renovation projects, we will learn more from Mr. Quentin Jossen, who is Energy and Climate Change Consultant at Climact. He will tell us, using the example of Belgium, how to engage with education stakeholders in order to plan a renovation strategy which is targeting schools. Also, before he starts, just a reminder to participants that you can already type in your questions in the chat box. So Quentin, now the floor is yours for about 10 minutes.
Thank you, Anne. 3 schools every hour. That's what needs to happen if we want to renovate all schools by 2050 to reach carbon neutrality. So 3 schools every hour, 24 hours a day, all days of the year, during 30 years, if each of the renovation leads to carbon neutrality. That's a huge challenge. You can go to the next slide. That's definitely not something that will happen overnight. We are not there yet. You see here the numbers in terms of annual renovation that we should reach for Belgium. So for Europe, with the numbers provided by Céline earlier, it would mean 26,000 schools every year. We need a comprehensive strategy to go from where we are up to the required activity in terms of volume and in terms of quality. The messages I will share with you today derive from a 2-year journey with stakeholders in Belgium. So the 2 years you see there, developing a model based on which we've structured our conclusion into a proposal for pilot program to kickstart that journey. So proposal that we deliver to the Belgian authorities. And the challenge will be that such pilot program be scalable so that it can, within a 2 to 3 years time, be upscaled to reach this steady state pace, which is to be reached as soon as possible. You can go to the next slide. As Climate, we entered that discussion through the door of GHG emission reductions, but definitely that's not by default that this topic is the one preventing school directors from sleeping. The first role of buildings infrastructures is to meet today and tomorrow's educational needs. And given the time children and their teachers spend in these infrastructure, it should be healthy, safe, and comfortable. And yes, these two aspects should be met with sustainable solutions. And as a fourth point, it's not only a building, it's a key component of the social structure of the community, which will bring constraints into the design of the renovation project, but that will also bring opportunities, for instance, in terms of financing, with appropriate materialization of the resources and infrastructures. You can go to the next slide. Imagine a door with 6 locks. You can open 1, 2, 3, 4 locks. It will still not open. We need to remove the 6 locks for the door to open. So we need to properly identify all barriers and structural solutions to all of these to make sure that we actually kickstart the journey towards fastened school renovation. I will not go into the details, but just the message is that for the right identification, we have to look at the different sources. The renovation works in themselves have barriers. The educational system has its own barriers, and the surrounding political and legal environment also brings specific barriers. They relate to financing, administration and processes, techniques and execution, operation and maintenance, motivation and priorities. So we are speaking about 1 to 2 million investments per schools with quite long payback time, through complex decision processes and tendering processes, with a really high challenge. If we need to renovate 3 schools every hour in Europe, we really need the required skills, and we need innovation to be able to deliver these amount of work and quality. But laying down the barriers is the easy part. So if you go to the next slide, the next part is to discuss the solutions. So people will easily bring the barriers. So what we suggested in our process in Belgium was to discuss with all stakeholders we could think of and bring them in the same room, saying that the solutions will not come from another planet. There is a limited number of persons that have the keys to structure the solutions. And that's by working together that it will be possible. And if it was found that solutions should come from someone else, no problem. He will be invited to the next meeting. So we co-elaborated a joint action plan, discussing, you can go to the next slide, discussing key topics related to techniques, financing, procedures. If I go from the left to the right, the main questions we discussed were the following: how to identify and take into account the needs of the school and their teams, how to ensure multi-criteria performance of the proposed solutions, how to reduce the total cost of the project, so the investments, but also the use of the infrastructure, how to optimize the management of the capital and facilitate the access to external financing, how to increase and facilitate access to public support and optimize building management, and finally, how to simplify the procedures and make sure that schools have access to the different type of private and public solutions. You can go to the next slide. I will summarize the conclusions with these 4 points. Nothing will happen if we have no common vision shared across stakeholders, different level of power, public policymakers, and different decision makers. So common vision, and plugged on that, a global real estate strategy that shows where we are, where we want to go, how we will plan the investment from now up to 2050 to make sure that we capture the synergies between the different investments, energy efficiency related or not, that we make sure that we optimize the way we have infrastructure to answer our needs. now that we have the way, we need a driver, and the driver would be an infrastructure manager, which has the required skills, time, mandates to drive, and also the right proximity with the people occupying the buildings, so that this person can be there at every step that the school will have to undergo through the renovation journey. These people will not be all Superman. They will need external tools. They will need external advice. So some kind of centralized coaches should be provided by the region, a country, depending on the right level to implement this. And finally, and certainly, there is a need for to improve the way we can channel existing and innovating financing solutions to flow into these projects. So these are the main conclusions really summarized of our 2-year journey with stakeholders. And you can go to the next slide. We have then structured a proposal of pilot program that we think would help bring answers to most of the questions that Céline has raised earlier in one of her last slides. Activities should go towards these 4 objectives: driving demand, boosting supply, streamline the school renovation market, and maximize the impact. And I will, just to finalize my presentation, give a few keywords for all of these 4 aspects. So the keywords for driving demand and triggering renovation decisions is to offer A to Z accompaniment services to schools. A to Z means that they are accompanied from the identification of their needs down to the long-term use of the infrastructure, and at all key stages, designing the project, tendering, negotiating, following the works, making sure infrastructure are properly used. Boosting the supply. As Carlis said, there is an important challenge to bring attractive invitation to the market actors. Certainly, we need processes to filter in trusted and skilled workers, but at the same time, the required level of quality and the tight budget will require innovation, which means engagement from these professionals. So we need to make sure it is attractive and that processes do not mean too heavy workload and administrative burden. I would summarize the streamlined school renovation market with 3 keywords: simplicity, scalability, and performance-based. And finally, for the last step, maximizing the impact, and that's certainly something where the EU level can also play a role, is to make sure that every single project starts from the learning of all the previous one to avoid reinventing the loop every time a region or some group of actors are putting so much energy to structure this kind of program. I will be happy to provide more details depending on the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Quentin, for this very interesting insight into how to engage and plan a renovation strategy for Belgian schools. Now that before I open the Q&A session with all the participants, I would like now to turn back to Carlis from the European Commission to hear some feedback. So Carlis, what would be your main lessons learned from this webinar on renovating schools? What will you bring back to DG Energy and to your commissioner to input to the renovation wave? Could you let us know your thoughts in about 4 to 5 minutes?
Thank you very much. I've listened attentively to the presentations and to the thoughts put on the table, and I think the first takeaway for me is that we are in the same mindset. We have discussed some concrete examples, thanks to Quentin, and also thanks to Maria Angiola. what the question would be how to make them work in the future. The thing with renovation or any type of energy efficiency action, in my experience, is that it's a moving target. The moment that you install LED lighting, it's installed. You have to push the boundary, think of the next thing to do. And here we're really tackling something quite big, and I was very much impressed by the figures that Quentin illustratively put. 3 schools every hour around the clock in Europe would need to be renovated. And it's not just the schools. Just to bring in the big picture, there are millions and millions of buildings, both private, both business and public sector, that would need to be renovated. I think that for me, maybe the first reaction would be to Mariangela's notion that the Next Generation EU funds should allow long-term financing for schools. I think that the instruments in principle do allow this. Question is that we also need the readiness from the stakeholders to take that leap of uncertainty sometimes, and we're ready to provide support and accompagnement throughout the way, because I think that when we now look at scaling up renovation, we're in touch with different services and the EIB. We're looking exactly at this, how to remove the barriers and how to change the perceptions, the risk perceptions that people or financing institutions might have towards energy efficiency investment. This is where technical assistance comes into play big time. And we're hoping to detail a bit more over the coming weeks how exactly we can accompany, for example, schools in their quest for energy efficiency renovation. What I would take away and share with my colleagues is something that sounds very straightforward, and that's indeed that renovation will have to be scalable, simple, and performance-based. And I think that's a very fundamental realization that we all have in front of us, but it's easier said than done. So we'll try to do our best to include it in the renovation wave, and I'm pretty sure it will figure high on the Commissioner's speaking points when she announces it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos, for this first initial reaction regarding what you have learned from our speakers today. Now I would like to open the Q&A session with our online audience. There are already some questions in the chat box, but don't hesitate to continue typing in your questions all along. We have around 20 minutes. I will actually start with a question that is from Elisabeth Hoffman, and the question is directed to Quentin. I think it's more a clarification question, more detailed. To Quentin, have you also engaged with stakeholders from other member states when sharing best practice or lessons learned to overcome barriers for school renovation? Quentin?
Yeah, so at this stage, yes, certainly when we speak to local stakeholders and decision makers, the examples are the best to say that it's possible. And so definitely what we started to do is to find best practice examples in the EU to show that it was possible. And we found great projects where at the like the Energy Sprong project that most of you might know, but targeted to residential buildings. There are projects targeted to schools where they go towards prefabricated solutions and they achieve deep renovation of schools within less than 8 weeks. So the challenge of the summer holidays. So at this stage, we mainly used best practice in the EU to feed our stories towards local stakeholders, as we haven't yet started the program I presented here in Belgium, we have no best practice to change in the other direction.
Thank you, Quentin, for that. I will now use the moderator's privilege because I have a question which is for Mariangela. You started your presentation by saying that we need to quantify the benefits in order to be able to integrate those results into the cost-benefit analysis. Could you tell us who, according to you, should be responsible to collect the data? How should it be done from a technical point of view? You were talking about data collection systems. Could you let us know more about what would be behind? Would you be referring to energy performance certificates, building renovation passports, something else? We were talking about the need to accompany schools in their renovation. What should be the appropriate tool for that? Mariangela?
Yes, thank you, Hélène. Well, you mentioned some of these tools that are absolutely essential in our view to make sure that we can actually deliver a renovation of quality over time, and also guarantee that the entity who is renovating, in this case I'm thinking about schools, can be accompanied. I think when in cases of if we remain in the cases of schools, but this is also true for public buildings, whether it be offices or hospitals and other type of buildings, the information and the data must come from the local level. So making sure that this information is collected is the first step. And then we immediately flip back to either the central authority, the national government, or the European Commission. I think in case of the EPCs, it is clear, and we've done a lot of research, and we're still doing a lot of research. Improving comfort, it is the driver for renovation in most countries, and it is the driver for renovation in the residential sector. So we have to make sure that we can get and collect the information and measure how this comfort is improved, but in a way that it's also understandable for the user, not only for the technical experts that delivers the EPC. And certainly the building renovation passport are an instrument that can help fulfill this twofold function, which is having a clear roadmap about how the renovation can be delivered over a given amount of time to make sure that we reach a deep renovation, and also collecting the data pre and post renovation. The building renovation passports include a sort of a repository of information that we commonly call logbook, which would then be really useful for further intervention on a specific building, but it would also be very useful because it could be transferred to the national databases, or to the and then to European databases, to make sure that we can collect as much information as possible. The difficulties that we had with this study was really trying and figuring out how to connect the improvement for each parameter that is connected to the indoor environmental quality, to the overall performance of a building, and how we could quantify it beyond the specific data point and the energy savings. Because if we don't look at that element, we're basically turning our head away from a potential of delivering much more than just energy savings. And I think in a moment where now, especially after COVID, we need to make sure that we all are living and working and staying in as healthy as possible environment. This becomes really important. And in a moment where we are looking at how to inject money into the economic recovery, making sure that this money has a long-lasting effect becomes a priority.
Thank you, Mariangela. And actually, transitioning, you were mentioning the recovery plans. There is a question that is linked to that issue, and it's a question from Adrian Joyce, directed to Carlis. You said that the renovation wave will need the right competences to ensure it reaches the ground in member states. Does this include financial resources? And what is your opinion about the idea, supported by more than 125 signatories, that a dedicated renovation facility or fund should be created as part of the EU Recovery and Resilience Initiative? Carlis?
Thank you very much for the question. By competences, I meant the policy and administrative competences. So you often go through a lot of different administrative layers before you reach EU EPBD and the other way around. The building renovation happens in a very local ecosystem, which is dictated by the municipalities or regional competences for education, for example, for vocational training that underpins skills. So the question is really broader than finance here. What I meant by the different competences, I think that the way how they're glued together and linked to each other is even more important. So how does the municipal government eventually relate to the national government? Do the long-term renovation strategies really take into account the situation on the ground? By the end of this year, the member states are supposed to submit their comprehensive assessments on efficiency potentials for heating and cooling following the Energy Efficiency Directive. And it will be interesting to see to what granularity and how the data is collected for that exercise by member states. And I believe we'll see a multitude of different approaches there. There will likely be member states who need to aggregate more because of the availability of data or internal arrangements for administration and cooperation between the different administrative levels and those types of competencies. So does the national government have a say on how the different infrastructure developments take place on the ground? When we're speaking buildings, we're speaking about physical space and infrastructure. So spatial planning, renovation, energy connections, transport for mobility, obviously, all of these and beyond, including ecosystems that are available there because of diversity and the cityscape around buildings, those become very relevant. And making these different vectors and strategies intersect at a specific building or district or quarter, that's not necessarily national or EU competence. Now, I understand that the point of the question, the real push, was about a dedicated financing facility. You can call it in different ways, in the sense that right now what the Next Generation EU and EU additional financing mechanism and front loading covered the 1.85 trillion front-loaded funds. It's really about using the known instruments and proposing new values there. The way that they will be used together, that's, I suppose, the question that Adrian is asking. You can give those funds a different name and a heading. The question is that we need to go in line with the absorption capacities of the markets. So first of all, yes, making money available is one of the barriers, and we can remove it to a certain extent by making EU funds available. But then when we discuss centrally managed and also, let's say, decentrally managed funds, such as cohesion and regional funds, then we have to make sure that we don't keep money unused in some envelopes where it could be absorbed somewhat quicker. I mean, it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but the goal here is to first build up the capacities for significant amounts of action to take place and money to be absorbed, because I think we're not quite there yet. We have to take it step by step. So a dedicated fund would make sense if we could announce certain big figures and make sure that action does take place. But I don't think that individually any of us are in the position to promise such things. But collectively, if we have specific municipalities who want to take part, member states who see a future in renovation in order to decarbonize their economies, then absolutely the services of the Commission are here, and also the EIB to provide certain credit lines. So I hope that goes in the direction of answering Adrian's question.
Thank you, Carlos, for tackling the very direct question. I would like now to turn back to Céline Carré, who spoke first, and maybe I would like to know also her lessons learned from other speakers and her point of view on maybe the financing questions. Céline?
Yes, Hélène, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Yes, okay. Well, thank you, Hélène. Thank you, Carlos, for the very precise answer to the financing question. The immediate thought I have on that is that if we need to renovate 3 schools every hour around the clock in Europe, we shouldn't have those absorption issue that you were mentioning. But I perfectly understand our duty to prepare the ground for that. I think this is our challenge to work on this in the next 2 months. I see that the funding being made available at EU level should precisely support the manpower ready to support in each country the project pipeline preparation. So we will certainly come back to that. But other than that, because you were inviting me to reflect on what we heard, I think, and I thank again all of our speakers for spending the time this morning with us. I see that we have a lot of data, we have figures, we have a striking case to make it happen, to make this renovation of schools happen. And I think it is our duty as a community to integrate all of this in the tools that we have, starting with the long-term renovation strategy, starting with tools like cost optimality, as Mariangela was mentioning, that we look at things holistically and not we don't and when we avoid having measurements that break things in silos again. Next to data, figures, and a good narrative, I would also see a responsibility for all of us to find new ways of collaborating. Maybe it could start with integrating educational ministries in charge of education in the implementation of those long-term renovation strategies. The voice needs to be heard next to the health ministry, and that integration needs to happen upfront. I see a responsibility also to make things happen in a simplified manner. I see also the potential for jobs. We probably underestimate the value and the attractiveness of jobs like the one that you described, Quentin, the infrastructure manager, which is the coordination point between the school community, the kids, the teachers, and the financing world, the SMEs and contractors. These are these are nice jobs to have, I would say, also in accompanying those projects. Yes, so and I cannot help think that we celebrated a few years ago the 30th anniversary of the Erasmus program that has really anchored Europe in the reality of kids, family over generation. I would invite to think about a flagship initiative of the same magnitude for renovating our schools. Hopefully, this is something that we can launch in the renovation wave. I don't know, Elena, if you wanted something else from me, or yes, thanks.
Thank you, Celine. I would have actually a last question. I see we have 5 more minutes. It's a question so from Simon McGuinness. He was highlighting, I think it's rather a comment first, that skills will follow finance, and then a question from Simon as well to Carlis, saying you focused on simple, scalable and performance for schools renovation wave. And he says, I hope you will add sustainable to that list, as it is very easy to solve the school problem by adding lots of technology with a very high embodied carbon component. That way we blow the carbon budget and have no carbon left to run the school over its remaining lifetime. And then his question is life cycle carbon budgeting going to be accounted for in the school's renovation wave? So I would say it's rather a question about embodied carbon in the renovation wave, and especially for schools. If Carlis wants to start, and then I will turn as well to Quentin, who also highlighted this wider point. So Carlis first.
Thank you very much, Simon, for this question. And I think the sustainable angle is indeed something that we don't speak too much about, but perhaps should be addressing a bit more. What we usually place the renovation discussion in, and this isn't only exclusive to schools, is that we see that the renovation rate is low and that the performance that we receive isn't sufficient. So we spend certain amounts of money and we get a refurbished kitchen, so to say, along with the windows, but we don't in fact reduce the energy bill for the final consumer. And I think that that's sort of part of the possible disappointment in the renovation wave, or the synchronization of renovation and some of the benefits, because people see that they spend money, they get an immediate benefit in terms of a living environment that has improved, but it isn't necessarily carried out with the quality they expect or with the effects that they could really enjoy in the longer term. So I think the long-term perspective is what Simon also refers to in a way. I mean, we have technologies in order to build and renovate in a more sustainable manner. The question here is, are the capacities enough if we're speaking out a renovation wave that's supposed to deliver 3 renovated schools per hour for the next 3 decades? So, I mean, I think the sustainability angle will be definitely there. The question is, to what extent can we keep the pace of renovation and the increase of the use of sustainable materials going forward hand in hand? And that's still a debate. So there's no specific decision taken on that, including on the life cycle carbon budgeting of construction build products or renovation. So you see there is a certain bottleneck issue that might arise. But we will definitely look into this once we're more into the detail of how we renovate and how much we actually renovate. Because right now the discussion has been more about making the funds available and also making sure that, first of all, member states' recovery plans and long-term renovation strategies reflect good quality renovation in terms of health, that was already mentioned by Mariangela, and also on energy performance. So these are the two things we have been focusing mostly so far. But then the next steps is indeed to see how that building is sort of put together. It's the next level of detail. And I think that what's important is that educating consumers or the people who actually contract the works, and some more long-termism and sustainability would definitely be welcome there as well. So I understand that's my last intervention probably. So I just wanted to thank you very much for organizing this event and looking forward to the discussions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlis. Maybe just a very short reaction then from Quentin, who also told me in the chat that he had some points to make on best practices.
Yeah, so maybe 2 points. One on the really needed parallel tracks with skills, demand, and financing. The renovation wave will be a wave only if it's built on an ocean of trust. We cannot afford structuring project, and at the end of the day we cannot make it. So we have to make sure we want to do it, we can do it, and we can afford. I think it's the three keywords for demand, skills, and financing. And a few learnings from best practices maybe worth sharing here. Crucial need to speak about total cost, as was mentioned before. There is lots of private finance that could be mobilized, but a key attention point from previous experiments were that school stakeholders want to feel they keep the ownership of their project, and there is already lots of money flowing in expenses for infrastructure. This is also a matter of optimizing the way we use what is already spent. And a last part, definitely we will not achieve deep renovation for every renovation we will make if we go to the three schools every hours. So that means that we will have some of the renovation that goes step by step, and we need to make sure that we avoid the lock-ins, as was flagged by Marie-Angela. So we need tools to ensure that each project is framed within a global strategy towards the long-term target. And looking at the market today, we really see a red flag there, where tools can be provided from best practices that would be living in the EU.
Thank you, Quentin. Now we're almost at the end of our webinar. I would like to thank all of our speakers for their presentations and responding to the questions. Thank you as well to our participants for your questions, and as well several comments in the chat box. And now I pass back the floor to Céline Carré for a very short conclusion.
Yes, Hélène, very short because we're already over time. Just a warm thank you to all of our speakers for this time to spend together with us today. We could continue the discussion for days, but I think next month is going to be, the priority is going to be to make it happen. And I think the key word I would keep in mind is synchronization of our tool, of our practices, also our responsibility to explain the dynamic between short-term and long-term to the market. So I would encourage all of you to continue the dialogue, to share your best practices, also to respond to the consultation on the renovation wave, which is open until the 9th of July at midnight, I understand. And I think you can be also reassured that EuroACE, together also with the Renovate Europe campaign, with further look at the renovation of school, it is important for our next generation. I thank you very much, and I wish you a very nice day. Thank you.